Hi, everyone. It's Fiona here from fionamarks.com, and I am very excited to be with my friend Satchin today. Satchin is an apprentice on the Asheville Vedic Astrology program, and I have invited him here to share with me some conversations about astrology. And before we get started too much, I would just like to invite Satchin to introduce himself.
Oh, thank you, Fiona, for inviting me, and really glad to be doing this. And I've been doing astrology for the past 6 years, and very intensely for the past 3 years. And it's my sadhana. It's what I do for a living. It's what it's the light that enables me to see, and I think it can benefit a lot of people if we go back to the roots of astrology and if we can contemplate life through the eyes of astrology. So I'm really excited to share and have this conversation with Fiona. Let's start.
Thank you, Sachin. It's great to have you here. And just to share with everyone that this is very spontaneous. We are kind of starting in the middle of a conversation. So I feel a little bit back to front, but I'm just going to go with the flow and start in the middle. And later on, we'll do some videos that are more introductory. So I'm so lucky to be part of a Sunday Zoom call with apprentices. It's something that I think brings all of us a lot of ideas and stimulates our studies in astrology. And this Sunday, we happened to be having a chat about something that really tied into a conversation that I was previously having with Fernando, another graduate of the apprenticeship program. So we have been talking about, with Fernando, the fire and the pedestal. We've been examining that astrology has this essence, undeniable essence of insight and truth, and that we can trace these roots back through thousands of years in many cultures. There are many traditional astrologies that are connected and have become disconnected. And now we find ourselves here at the beginning of this 21st century, putting together astrology that perhaps some of the threads have been lost, and we're trying to gather them once again. And Fernando and I were talking about truth and how do you seek truth, and how does one not become lost or on the wrong path. And I was wondering with him whether Venus might be, some kind of inner sense that we have, some somatic sense that we have in the body when we feel truth. And Fernando was sharing with me about Mercury and these objective insights like the razor, the Occam's razor of truth. And then on the weekend, this topic spontaneously also came up between us, and I wanted to pursue this conversation to keep going about how one feels truth, and how different parts of your chart might give you different strengths in perceiving truth. And I am going to ask Sachin a question in a moment. So I'll just frame it one more time and then I will throw it to you, which was in the conversation on Sunday, we happened to just be saying that, humans, one has to kind of acknowledge that humans can be imperfect or have demonstrated their imperfections. And no wonder a human system of rebuilding astrology or documenting astrology and passing it down generation by generation, of course there are going to be imperfections. And when we think about the software that we all use, the assumptions that are in that software all allow for human imperfections. And this is obviously a way of thinking about humanity and about history. And Sachin, you shared beautifully that you can see that, of course, on one level that's true. But do you remember the contrasting perspective that you brought to that conversation?
Yeah, I
Would
do.
you mind sharing it with the audience?
So it was uh, human beings are imperfect. So the knowledge that we have in astrology is, so the context was that since the knowledge of human beings have created astrology, and human beings are imperfect. So something about astrology might be imperfect. That's one sense it can be taken in. So on a very basic level, uh, i that's one way to look at life. That life in and of itself, there are errors in life, and because human beings are imperfect, and whatever they create is imperfect. But that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is that human beings have been created by the sound of creation. You can call it the creator, shabda or nad, or the inherent vibration upon which everything is, the jyoti and the shruti that they call it. The shruti is the sound principle, and jyoti being the light principle. So that is upholding the creation, and that is perfect. And that light and sound descends into realities, and from extreme geometric harmony to little lesser to little lesser to little lesser, but still harmony, and to the point of deep dark ignorance, where which seems like error, but it's just a lack of perception. So ignorance. So there's a perspective that darkness in and of itself inherently is not something. It's nothing. So when we say human beings are imperfect and what they create is imperfect, we are pointing towards nothingness. We're pointing towards darkness. So there's inherently nothing that you're trying to point towards something. That's what these great masters also talk about. Like, there is no self to fix in the first place,
Amen.
and but we need to first get a self together. So I think uh, from a Western perspective, from Jungian perspective, Jung said something like, um, first half of your life is creating an ego, and the second half is like giving it up. So something
Yes.
like that. First, you create a false sense of darkness, and
Yep.
then you can start appreciating light and start
Yep.
moving towards light.
Yep.
So that was the thing I was getting at that point. And so when we approach a subject from a dark perspective, we are sort of we wouldn't go too far with it, because it's not fruitful. It's starving you. It's constantly starving you. It's eating you from the inside. And you'll see the readings that you'll do, the sessions you'll do in moments of darkness. When I give a session, all I can see is darkness. So when people are doing too much shadow work, they are also looking at only the shadows of other people. When they do light work, they only see goodness in other people, and that can lead to some sort of naivete. And with too much of shadow work, it can lead to uh, an even darker space. So the point of shadow work gets this thing. It's doesn't fulfill itself at all. So there, as always with everything, it's all about that balance. And that brings us to the next step from this part, that the balance require is an act. It's not a destination. And that act of balance requires us to have vivek. Vivek meaning discrimination. Sorry, discernment, not discrimination. Discernment. So that insight of that knowingness that this is the right thing to do at this point and this is the wrong thing to do at this point, this uh, relative to something righter and wronger than something else, with well-being being the guiding force. Like, I want to have well-being, and to have that well-being, this is righter at this point and this is wronger. And that's what's beautiful about the Vedic philosophy and Dharma Shastras of India, that we are never into right and wrong.
Mm.
We are into dilemmas. We're into the rightness and wrongness of things. So all our ancient texts, when you get into it, there is no in Hinduism. And if it's not someone who is an ideologue or a fanatic, you'll see these people like being very open and generous and adaptable. They'll go to a church also, and they'll bow down to Jesus. I don't know where this conversation is going. I just jump from one tangent to another of this. It's also connected. So just, and let's bring ourselves back to the center. And
Yes.
over to you, or back to
Yes.
you.
Yes, but absolutely. This is the problem with these conversations is they're all encompassing. So it's easy to speak about everything. But to summarize what you're bringing to the conversation is that if we want to, one's mind can focus on the darkness, on what's not working, on what's gone wrong. But unfortunately, the flaw of that is that whatever the mind gives its attention to kind of grows. So then the darkness and the ignorance kind of grows um, if we give the mind's attention to that. And however, as well as there being imperfections, which we've all experienced, and anyone who looks at their own chart, there are less than ideal placements. So we all know that there are imperfections. But we can also say that in everyone's chart, there is the sun resonating that energy of pure consciousness, and there's Jupiter, that wisdom that you were speaking about there. That so the chart has all charts have all of these qualities in them. And so while on one side we can say that humans are imperfect and therefore they create imperfect systems and religions and philosophies, we can also, it's completely also true to say that all humans have the soul consciousness resonating in their energy makeup, and therefore all humans are also perfection. They are, as you were saying, there's not, the self is not broken, or the soul is not broken. I don't know, we don't have language for this in English.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a good like crux of it.
Yeah.
Even something about when you said something about mind and attention, and that's what's really beautiful. Mind in itself is really when you get into uh, subtle stuff about consciousness, where you can still hold attention and have a no mind state.
Yes.
And mind, because mind's job is to survival, self preservation,
Yes.
and sun is that attention. The sun is just that light which you can direct outwards or inwards. That's it. And mine is more lunar, uh, manas. And mine has buddhi, which is Mercury, and it has amkara, which is a sense of I-ness. And even sun can be called amkara, sense of I-ness. But as far as uh, certain texts go, they talk about moon having manas having the sense of I-ness and a sense of buddhi, like
Yes.
discriminating.
Yes.
This is up, this is down, so that I don't fall. This is, these berries are poisonous. These berries are good for me, so that you don't eat the poisonous berries. And that it's negative. My mind is always negating. And that's what I really liked. Ernst Wilhelm talks about this. It's so beautiful. He talks about a lunar way of shopping. When you go with a very lunar person, they'd be like, they'll get 10 things in front of them. They'll be like, okay, not this, not this, not this, this. So
Yeah.
they use a process of negation.
Yes.
And the son is like, I want this. They have a vision, they go get it. That one
Yes.
thing. They just go and get that one thing. It's like more directed in one go, one
Yes.
flow. So ways of knowing, this brings us to the epistemology part of it also. Over to you.
Yeah, well, and over to you as well. So,
Okay, go ahead.
let's talk about the planet's energies and their different ways of knowing, or also their different intelligences. So,
Mhm.
to bring it back to the original conversation that I was having at the end of the Fire and Pedestal, we were talking about Mercury is an obvious place in some ways to go, because Mercury is that objective, that's the rap that it gets, that's the objective investigator, or just wants to research and find out and find detail. So that is a way to come to knowledge or truth. Let's talk about Mercury as an entry into that. But I open the conversation up to contrast that with other planets if appropriate.
Okay. So, Mercury, I've been thinking about it really
Mm,
hard today since morning, really, really
thank you,
hard. And I
Sachin.
was like, okay, what happened with Buddha, which is the avatar of Mercury? Some people say it's Balaram, but Buddha is appropriate. Uh, Buddha wasn't objective as such. Lord Buddha had a had four great incidents. He saw death, he saw disease, and that colored his experience,
Yes,
and
yes,
that brought him to the investigation. So you
yes,
meet any academic, and there is no one who's purely objective. It's just impossible to have a mind and be perfectly objective. But Mercury and mercurial people seek that objectivity, and they try to create research methods which destroy the human soul, and they just want to be so dry that how can we have, and Edgar Morin talks about it, a French philosopher, about working with complexity and research methodology. uh, Professor Edgar Morin, because he's like beautiful, like 99 years old. He's going to be 100 years old this year. So he really he talks about like you can't be that objective. Subjectivity has to become a part of your research. On one hand we have this, on the other hand we have then how can we be objective? That has nothing to do with Mercury. That's when you need no mind. That's when you need uh, no books. You can't have that with books. There's a way to know without other people's inferences. And Mercury is Mimamsa philosophy, Mimamsa. I think that's how you say it. And so I was taking some notes on it, and Mercury's ways are either testimony, because Edgar Morin has said it, that's why it's true. And because I mean he's a genius, he has 6 PhDs or whatever. Like, I mean, how can you like question Edgar Morin? So I mean, yeah, I mean you ride on the shoulders of giants, right? Google Scholar.
yes.
And that's one way to know. Then uh, Mercury talks about inference. It talks about analogy. It talks about, but there's this one part of Mercury, postulation, which is getting a arthapatti, which is like getting a premise based on uh, basically you start from a premise, which is typical philosophy, Western philosophy. And then the final one is pratyaksha. So Nyayikas also did it, and Mimansas also did it. Nyayikas, Mimamsa just had one more thing, which is postulation,
Hmm.
Arthapatti, and then there's another school with non-postulation. But Nyaya comes from Mars then. So in Gemini Sutras, I think the way of knowing is given for every planet. And for
Ah,
it's so beautiful. That's where it's at. And with Mars, it says Nyaya. And Ernst Willem teaches this. It's so beautiful. He says it's logic, and logic has to be based on set of information that you already have. You have these 10 pieces of puzzle, and then you put all the pieces of puzzle and you make sense out of it. But then you miss out on the rest of the life. So how do we get to pratyaksha, which means direct perception of things? That's
yep.
again Mars. Mars is like, okay, no, I know it's beautiful in that country. I know it's like this. Some people are like that, da, 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 but I need to go and see it for myself. And Mars is fire element, and Mars rules the karmendriya of feet and the gyanendriya of I think eyes and feet are connected with Mars. So the fire element, and it wants to see and go directly into things. And that's where Mercury fails. Mercury is paralysis by analysis. Uh, And Western philosophy is mercurial, it's dry, and personally I love it to some extent, but it's just earth element. At some point your rationalism wouldn't work. Criticism, Mercury likes criticism, and the problem with criticism is the moment you criticize, be ready for a conflict and be ready for living a conflicted life. It's your internal conflicts being projected outwards as truth. So, and you just, another problem with Mercury is it's just more questions. That's why Western philosophy is never ending. And Eastern philosophy is moksha, end. Like you leave the body itself, you leave the buddhi itself, manas itself, you abandon. And we don't call it philosophy in India, we call it shastra, darshanam, which means uh, to see, getting to see. How do you see life? Oh, I see life as a whole. Okay, another point. How do you see? I see life as paths. How do you see? I don't see any life. I see only death. Okay, so how can we see we see in these different ways?
Yeah.
So what is this that is seeing itself? And then they went into like a deeper layer of philosophy. Like, okay, who is seeing? And then they're like, okay, is there a way to is consciousness non-local? I mean, if I close my eyes and I think I'm in the States and I imagine the States and am I here now? uh, is it uh, local? And if it's not, where am I in my dreams? So
Yeah.
we went really crazy with that stuff. We went into unconsciousness, consciousness, super consciousness, and states which are profound, and that's what makes Jyotisha superior. So I wanted to get to that point also, because a science is only as powerful as its philosophical foundations, richness, philosophical richness. And Jyotish is so rich. The land is so fertile. You want to talk about an archetype? You have hundreds of stories of archetypes. You don't exhaust yourself with a couple of Nordic myths or like a couple of stories from Germanic people or like it's so rich. I mean, and it's so beautifully interwoven with each other. I mean, you're studying Rahu and you're studying Swarbhanu, and you're like, okay, Rahu Varaha avatar went down, and he's coming out with he has to fight the demon Hiranyakashyap, and you find out, okay, Hiranyakashyap is supposed to be Ravan from one of his. He had to fulfill a curse that God had to kill him in one of his incarnation. And so you're studying one myth and you encounter a huge new realm. You're like, okay, now, right now I'm studying about Rama's life, also about Lakshman's life also, because Lakshman was, if Rama was Vishnu, Lakshman becomes Adi Shesha. And then you're like, okay, Adi Shesha. Now there's Rahu happening there also in that life. And right, but am I not studying Swarbhanu, Varaha, and all these stuffs right now here? And but there's Rahu there, and then you're studying that myth, and I'm like, okay, now there's Hanuman ji there, and with Hanuman ji there is Mars. Now you're talking about Mars, righteousness, brahmacharya. And you're like, it's so rich. You can dance all day long. And that's what makes Jyotisha superior. That's what makes it so rich with the mathematics, with the profound calculations. And I also don't agree with with the Greco-Roman foundations. Like Jyotisha comes, the ascendant astrology, Hora astrology comes from uh, the Greco-Roman side in 2 AD, 2 BC. I think,
Wonderful. All right. I think that is another fascinating conversation for us to
yeah,
have, because we've been talking to Fernando about that as well. So that'll be a beautiful complement to that. So but I'm going to post-it note that to bring us to the topic that we have for today around finding truth. Now, I have to, as a point of housekeeping, because probably because of my ascendant or something in my chart, I have to um, breathe and say that thinking one thing is superior or not superior, to me, my alarm bells go off and I feel uncomfortable about that. So maybe for my own self, I need to acknowledge that the richness of Hinduism and Vedic philosophy is astounding. And as you say, the interconnectedness of it and the layering and the way that it can be interpreted on different levels. So absolutely agree with that. And that may be because of what a gift that culture has had to be able to keep its mythology consistent, or the same stories being told over so many thousands of years, but that other cultures have had chances to keep their cultures alive, and some cultures haven't had those chances, and they've been invaded and overtaken. And our understanding of what those cultures had, now when we look at it, maybe we don't understand the richness that was there. But for example, to bring in, I'm Australian, the Indigenous people of Australia, there was more than 500 spoken languages
Imagine.
on that continent, of which very few survive now. I get chills when I speak about it, because, and in those languages not surviving, mythology also unfortunately doesn't survive. So this is my little thing about this mythology is superior or whatever. I just want to acknowledge that perhaps the conditions have allowed the Vedic Hinduism philosophy to continue to be told in a way that other cultures haven't had. So I imagine that all humans tell amazing creation stories and amazing evolution stories, and we're just lucky that the Vedic Hindu ones have survived in a large body that we can continue to mine into. But it is my hope, guess, belief that other cultures are also telling just as rich stories, and we may not know them, or they might not have had the chance to survive as long. So sorry for my housekeeping that has to say something like that.
No, no, that's very important to bring yourself to the center with the part where you say, yeah, it's very important to bring yourself into that space also, because it balances you and grounds you and opens you up to like exploring other cultures from also the beautiful, more like receptive eyes. And that's the thing. I when I use the word superior, I the correct word is complex,
Yes.
not
Great. See,
superior.
I'm at ease. Now I'm at ease,
Yeah,
Sachin.
yeah.
Great. Good. But now that I've done that housekeeping, to pick up on what you're saying, yeah, I think we said this a little bit off camera, so I'm bringing in something that Sachin said to me previously, so I don't want to claim any brilliance in this, even though I think it's brilliant, but I just want to acknowledge that it wasn't my thought, is that in some ways, one of the limitations for Mercury, like it brings these great skills of investigation
Mhm.
and of the pursuit of some objective truth that is not related to anything other than what is provable. But unfortunately, perhaps Mercury forgets its position, that it's the territory that it's investigating is actually a small part of a greater whole, but the only place where its skills are applying are in this smaller space, which it's doing a great job in that smaller space, but it can't use those skills in the greater space. And we were talking about this because Mercury is actually the sun of the moon. Is
Yeah.
that correct, Sachin? Tell me a little bit about, I guess there's a really big understanding of knowledge.
And
Um,
that's the
and
beauty
then
of
there are
Jyotish.
smaller places.
Yeah, yeah. That's the beauty of Jyotish. Like the moment we uh, you take one planet and there's an underlying school of philosophy which you can explore. Like so if you're a Saturnine person, uh, Yama, Niyama, Pratyahara. and all the yoga stuff, all the ascetic stuff comes into being, where you restrict and control and direct life in such a way that you get salvation of some sort: physical salvation, mental salvation, intellectual salvation, or soul's liberation. uh, you use moon. It's uh, Samkhya, also Sankhya philosophy. And Sankhya is like the foundation of Jyotish. Uh, Sankhya is actually the only creation myth which is systematically designed in such a way that it can even be used in physiology.
Absolutely. And let's post-it note another conversation about that, because that is a great gift. That systematic understanding of how energy or consciousness becomes matter at each level. It's
So,
yep.
like, the implication of that is so profound. Like, imagine like a creation myth, which we call myth, is such so powerful that it can heal cancer.
Yep.
Imagine, like, you can
Yep.
literally have an herb and use the elementology of the herb, and
Yep.
then direct certain energies in your body in such a way that it heals energetic imbalance.
Yep. Absolutely.
Without-
Great. So I'm looking forward to that conversation already.
So
But coming back to what you were saying, so the moon, we were talking about the moon as a way of knowing.
moon has the Samkhya and the underlying philosophy of that, and moon also has receptivity, patrata. So if you can be very receptive, like a very calm moon, the most uh, the most self-evident thing that happens to you when your moon is completely silent. Moon is like, okay, where's this light coming from?
Mm,
This is not my light. And you go to the soul
yeah.
immediately. So all of the Zen, moon and the lake, the moon in Buddhism, so much this stuff, and it's so beautiful. Like, the moment the lake is calm, the moon's light becomes evident. You go to the moon, you're like, okay, I am this, I am that, and the sun is like, I am.
Yep.
That's it. This dot dot dot.
Yeah.
So then we have Venus, and Venus is told to be the Kavi, the poet. And the beauty of poetry is Venus's way is more, as Ernst Willem says, seeing meaning where there is none. And that's the beauty of poetry. Because inherently you are in Maya, so illusion. If reality is being hallucinated, and if there is something beyond this, then no matter how true your truth here is, it's still within a falsehood. It's within the falsehood of Maya. So Venus is allows you to see truth inherently in a place where there is no truth. So you and that then that poetry allows you to get into bhakti. And Venus's way is devotion, contemplation, and Venus uh, brings you to a new level of understanding of things. Venus is actually the greatest student. Venus, one of the names of Venus is Antevasin, which means the student who lives at the house of the Guru
Yeah.
and does some work, chores for the Guru, and the Guru gives him knowledge, whatever the Guru knows. And Venus is one of the most misunderstood planets, as it's so profound. Even Parshurama, the avatar of Venus, is to be understood if you want to understand that way of knowing. And we need to be all inclusive as astrologers. We need to have
Yes.
all ways of knowing accessible to us, because our client is not necessarily mercurial. So you
Yes.
can't always tell your client to read this book. You can't always tell your client to, and that's what I also do. Like, when I recommend things to my clients, I give them six seven recommendations, and which is relevant to every planet. So one would be Mars. Like, okay, you understand things logically, and you attack it in a through a practice. Like, okay, do this in the morning, wake up at 6, then I can give pranayama and stuff for their Saturn, so that their vayus can, or some restriction. Some people like restriction. So like, okay, quit eating food after 5. And they're like, yes, I can do that. Like one client just jumped up. She's like, I can do that. I can not eat after 5. And that really helped her. Then there can be one way can be solar way. And solar way is more like self-sacrificial. And sun's knowledge is Gita. So Gita is the music. So sun's knowledge is actually very difficult to handle because
Yeah.
sun weighs kevalyam, which is isolation, alone. I'm alone.
Yep.
I am. That's all. You can't give anything to me. I just
Yep.
am. And sun's ways are very difficult. And usually, people who have a sense of solar way, I wouldn't say they don't come to astrologers, but they already have some knowledge of astrology and they use it for personal guidance or something like that.
Mm,
So they always have this music going on for themselves also in that way. And then there's a transcendental music, and that's beyond our current scope of level of consciousness, I guess, at least for me. Then we have uh, Jupiter and discernment, and Jupiter's way is goodness. It has nothing to do with philosophical insight.
yeah.
Uh, Jupiter and the wisdom that we talk about is discernment. The Viveka gets so powerful. And what's interesting, I recently in the recent course of on Lajit mastering Lajit Adi Avasthas by Ernst, he has a video on habits of Jupiter, where he says, and it's so interesting. If this doesn't blow your mind, I don't know what will. Jupiter has its own light.
Yeah.
So Jupiter, the scientists found out that uh, Jupiter is radiating more light than it is receiving from the sun. So, and they're like, okay, Jupiter inherently has its own light, and Jupiter, some theorists say that Jupiter was going to become its own star,
Yeah.
but it did not for some reason.
Yeah.
That's so profound. And then Jupiter has a gravitational pull towards the sun, and it
Yes.
creates that barycenter. So Guru is the only thing that can affect the soul and create a soul change, the most immovable path. And that brings me to also the point that you cannot change your chart. You
Yeah.
can,
Yeah.
and you can change your chart, but you need Jupiter. Only Jupiter can move soul from its space. And people who've had a true guru, true spirit, and another point is there are true gurus currently on earth, and there is a true guru at every point in time on earth. Earth, be it Kali Yuga, Dwapar, Treta, Satya Yug, any yug will have a true guru to guide the souls back. That's like a huge, very ancient teaching of a very ancient truth. Like God never, the Creator never allows Earth to be abandoned, and that's also so important for us to understand. Uh,
Yes.
and so Jupiter's understanding is Gemini says Jupiter, the one who speaks less.
Mm.
So the philosopher of Jupiter is philosophy of Jupiter. What Jupiter knows, it can't really tell. It's a felt experience. That's why Jupiter is exalted in Cancer.
Yeah. I always think that like compassion and forgiveness practices are very good for connecting with the energy of Jupiter. That we can think of it as
Yeah,
being the guru, and like you said, being the philosopher, it rules Sagittarius. You can think that Jupiter is an all-knowing, spiritually wise person or something. But for humans to access, Jupiter, it's that intellect coming into the heart space, and where the boundaries, because Jupiter is so expansive, the energy is much better represented in that heart center than in the more mental intellect approach. So
true.
that that's how I
Yeah.
help people, get in touch with Jupiter. Yeah.
That's the way with Jupiter, with
Yeah.
that compassion and uh, yeah. So, under, right understanding is also a word. Developing the right understanding, which gives you the right thoughts, which gives you the right action. So,
Yeah.
uh,
So I think we've covered a lot of planets there. Yeah, I think we've managed to
we
touch on
covered
everybody.
Jupiter, Mercury, Mars, Sun, Moon, Venus.
Yes. S-
Rahu's intelligence is inventiveness. So
Yeah.
Rahu is the genius who, the one pushing the boundaries. And Rahu is just so risky. It's just so risky. It's terrifying. It's just like everything Rahu is just a bit like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing exactly. And that's where Rahu needs Jupiter's uh, luck, you can say guidance, or you can say that uh, canceling the ticket before the plane gets delayed. So
Yes.
cancel, like those moments of like reversal.
Yes.
And Rahu needs courage.
Yeah.
The two things Rahu needs. So Mars, the army general, Rahu and Ketu is the army. So Rahu and Ketu require the Mars, like someone to be like, okay, this is the path that we are traversing on. And Jupiter, which is like, okay, once uh, you get the insight when a wild beast tries to attack you, or once you get a great insight from this darkness, you know how to embrace it and not just spaz out like crack. So that, and then Ketu's intelligence is mathematics, ganit. So Ketu is very calculative and inward, calculative, uh, precise, incisive, and very precise, and it seeks perfection from whatever wherever it is. And I've been thinking about Ketu also the past 2 days. An insight came to me, like, Ketu is where we sprout from. Ket, so I don't know if it's real. I'm still thinking about it. Uh, because
This is breaking news, everyone. This is hot off the press.
so with Ketu is, I think that's the center of the chart. That's where because if you look at it from a perspective, okay, the basic philosophy of astrology is karma. You can't start astrology by not acknowledging action itself. So action, and then theory of action, which is a theory of action is a very Western way of looking at it. From an Eastern perspective, it's the truth of action. Um, um, which is prarabdh, sanchit karma, all of your backlog, action from time immemorial, uh, prarabdh karma, the birth chart, which you're going to face in this life, and kriyaman karma, which we are doing right now. And some of what we are doing right now is being influenced by our prarabdh, and nothing is at this moment being influenced by the sanchit. Sanchit is just the backlog. Some of what we're doing is being influenced by Prarabdha energy, the patterns, and some of the patterns, there's these loose ends, energetic loose ends, where you can just skip out of your fatedness and engage into free will. But it's very complex, so it's
Yes.
impossible for the intellect to understand. So if we look at it from that perspective, the avatar of Ketu is Matsya, and Matsya was given the thing of like when the creation goes back to nothingness, you have to preserve the Vedas, the knowledge. Uh, Vedas meaning just simply knowledge, and using that knowledge, that's the imprint that will give you a new creation. And Sadhguru has a video on this where he says that we are in the 83rd cycle of this creation. And this creation still has a few imprints of this 82nd and 81st creation, and few imprints, and no imprints of the first few creations, maybe a little bit. So Ketu is that imprints that allow for this life to manifest.
Mm-hmm.
And Ketu is, and from Ketu you sprout, an entire chart is born according to the past dissolution cycle imprint, past death. You're born into this. And Ketu is the Karaka for liberation also.
Yeah.
So eventually, when you do get the Satori, when you do get the enlightenment experience, you all the planet gets dissolved into Ketu, and you leave and you get into self realization, and then God realization. Um, but with the Ketu keeps that imprint. I don't know what happens to that. That's just beyond. I think it's more like an experiential thing. But this is what I've currently discerned
Yes.
and derived from all the things that I've been contemplating with Ketu. So Ketu becomes that uh, precision. The intelligence of Ketu is perfection, and it keeps. And Rahu is that exploration. It goes on into the world to find that, and then allow for Ketu to become more perfect. So Ketu is like, okay, this kingdom is perfect, and we don't need to go out. And then these people come from outside and they start attacking us. And then you're like, okay, Rahu, you go and explore how many such kingdoms are there who can possibly attack us. And then Ketu's kingdom becomes a bit more perfect because of Rahu's exploration. And eventually we get out of this compulsiveness of Rahu and Ketu, and they basically unite, and you something happens. I don't know.
Well, we're all strapped in and ready for that ride. But it's good to be reminded of the great work that K2 is doing in our charts. Um, wow, as usual, Sachin, there is a whole world in what you have been sharing. I want to put in one final thing that I'm thinking is the closing to this part of our conversation today, which is the importance of meditation for the astrologer. That, as we just talked about, there's a lot of complexity in the chart, there's a lot of complexity in the mythology that Vedic astrology comes through. And so, as well as we've been exploring how each planetary energy has a strength in our knowledge or discernment or intelligence, the the essential skill maybe for an astrologer, or the essential practice, is meditation.
So that's the foundation of it. That's, I mean, that's like the one thing that we need to be reminded of. I'm glad that you brought this up. And it's like it's um, it's where you start from actually. Uh, y- y- and not contemplation, not intense thinking,
No.
but like real meditation. And
Yeah.
maybe in like a half an hour sitting, you get 1 minute of meditation,
Yeah.
but that's beautiful. Like the entire 29 minutes are
Yeah.
worth it.
Yeah.
So that's like so important. That, and so ideals of an astrologer is something that I would eventually get into after another 20, 30 years, not right now. Because there's so much wrong right now, so many imperfections and so many non-cleanliness of mind
Yes.
that I can't talk about idealistic things. I can only strive for it right now, and I
Yeah.
think probably even then I'll be striving for them. Who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, one of them is meditation, dhyana, uh, especially when you're judging, because you're basically judging others. And the beauty of astrology is that you you don't need the psychology form really. It helps, but if you can basically get into that space directly. And that's also a mistake that astrologers, that's probably a topic for another video.
Yes. Good.
We make like mistakes like this. We make so many assumptions about the client. So that humility part, the meditation part, the part where you live more simply and uh, stuff like that. It's dhyana is basic. Like you have to sit on just by yourself and see your trash come up, and you just see all the beautiful things come up, and get into that witness state as much as you can, even on bad days, on good days. Uh,
Absolutely. I have a painting that I made about that. It's exactly that, you know. And so I agree with you that really that transcending the mind, finding the stillness of the no mind or of the no thoughts, that there's a whole perception, wisdom thing that's going to occur from that practice. I'm always telling people that there's no perfection in meditation, that it's all it's all practice. It's practice. And exactly what you said, the 29 minutes are that's very normal, that there's 29 minutes of mess and maybe a glimpse of stillness. Sachin, my dog is about to start barking. So I think this is the perfect time for us to wrap up our conversation. I wanted to really acknowledge so many of the points that we've made today, that the astrologer, the best skill that we can have, if you've only got one time to perfect one thing about being an astrologer, it's meditation, cleansing the mind. But also to acknowledge that each of us, both astrologers and our clients, have different strengths in the intelligences of their planets. And that is to be honored both by the astrologer and the clients, and to look for practices that help clients access their wisdom, and stretch them into areas where they maybe haven't explored as well. So, and now we have at least 3 or 4 post-it noted conversations to continue. So, Sachin, I want to thank you so much for your time, and for sipping chai with me today. And I look forward to sipping more chai with you the next time. I can't wait to speak to you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And if any thing has been said that hurt anyone in any way, there's no intention to do that. And it's the point and purpose of all of this is to just bring joy and insight and wisdom and more deeper conversations. So it's very important to like just apologize for any wrongdoings.
Well, I better jump on that bandwagon too, and yeah, that is obviously our intention, is just to share our joy of astrology, and I hope that you guys have enjoyed that, and that we'll have the opportunity to share even more with you. All right, very, very warm thoughts for you, Sachin, and see you all again soon.
Yes.